So we're going to be on this, not today. We definitely won't be on this time range today, but in part 2, there'll be a second Maccabean Revolt. Part 2, because Seleucid Empire just ain't going away, right? Just because Antiochus is going away doesn't mean they're going away. So we got the hammer here. That's what Maccabee means, or Macabre, I think, is to hammer. So they're given that name because of what they do. And we'll get to them in a second. So most of this is coming from Josephus and 1st and 2nd Maccabees. And just a reminder that it's just not a jaunt through history. We're trying to look at the priesthood. We're trying to look at where the Pharisees, where the Sadducees came from, what they believe, and how that led into rabbinical Judaism, and who are the Sadducees today? Who are the Essenes? Who are the Zadokites? So you might notice that I focus more on the priesthood and stuff and less about Judah running around and killing people. Just to hit part 2 again, we look down on the Ptolemies, and there's some funny questions there that we'll cover next week. But they did give us the Septuagint. Now, this is credited with a star here, Ptolemy II, Philadelphus, but Philopator, who's the 4th, is a story of Maccabees the 3rd. I think it would make sense if it was the 4th. Just like he saw these angels, and he's like, all right, I want to know more about your God, right? He's clearly real. So maybe that's what caused it. It would fit this time reign, very end of it, right? It was around 205 BC, that Battle of Raphia. But anyways, I asked my Orthodox patient about this, and he knew right away. It's like, yep, 72 elders, put them in different chambers, and they all wrote their own version, and it was all perfect. And it's like, it's a God thing, it's a miracle. So that was just the Torah. So just the first 5 books. But still, thank you, Library of Alexandria and the Ptolemies. You did give us something. So I'll be remiss if we did not mention such things. Okay, moving on. So now the Ptolemies are getting it handed to them by the Seleucids. The tables have turned. So in 170 BC, Antiochus, this will be the 4th, he conquers all but Alexandria. He's just a busy boy. He has to go back up north, fight the Parthians and whoever else is up there. Lots of people to battle. All right, this is the Fertile Crescent. It's just a constant struggle. It's a hard, giant kingdom to hold. So he has to return. And Rome is thinking at this point, like, all right, I like these two guys fighting each other, but at the same time, if one king conquers all of it, then he's king of everything. And then, like we mentioned in part 2, if the Greek states united, then it'd be trouble for Rome. It'd be a lot. They're dealing with not just the Greeks, Thrace and Greece, but Carthage doesn't like them, and Hannibal and all that fun stuff. So at first, Judea welcomed, and this was a surprise to me, welcomed the change, because the House of Ptolemy were not as tolerant as the Seleucids were, which is surprising if you've read Maccabees before. So then in 168 BC, Antiochus, he's ready again for round 2 with the Ptolemies. He comes back down, and this time to finish the job. And this is where Rome is getting scared. There's Alexandria. So it's a cool story that, Antiochus and his army are somewhere around the Sinai Peninsula, I believe, and close to the coast. So this guy meets him on the beach to draw a line in the sand. Circle in the sand, really. Circles him. And says, if you leave this circle, before you leave this circle, give me an answer. Tell me, are you going to attack the Ptolemies? Because if you do, Rome will be against you. Or you can turn around and Rome will do nothing. So he wasn't able to talk with his advisors. He had to make a decision right there. He decided he didn't really want to deal with Rome. He had enough to deal with. But the big problem is he's now unable to pay his soldiers with the promised loot from Egypt. So Antiochus needed a new target to unleash his army on, and he knew the Judeans were running a surplus at the temple in Jerusalem to prepare for the Shemitah year. So that's the 7th year. So they kind of smartly store up for the 7th year, where they're going to let the land rest. They're not going to sow any crops. So that means they're going to miss out on that harvest. So they prepare. Go home or fight Rome. So we're going to backtrack a little bit, look at the triple change up here in the priesthood. So we got the good priest, which is Onias III. We got the bad guy, is Jason. He's bad. He changed his name to a Greek name. His name would have been Joshua or Yeshua. And the ugly is Menelaus. Right? So let's talk about them quick. So Jason was the brother of Onias III. And Onias III, he's like the last Sadducite priest. He's the last priest, we could say ever, high priest ever, right? That's crazy to think about. Because everyone that follows him, there's good people and there's good intentioned, but they were not of the line of Zadok. And the people argue that. But he was of the Oniads, Simon II. He was high priest. He's a righteous man. Jason, not so much. He's already Greek-minded, and he wants the high priest, so he decides to buy it. So Hellenization began under Jason, who just paid off Antiochus for the position of high priest. And he instituted the Greek games, and he built a training facility, an arena, all that stuff, sending the Jews out to go compete. Many Jews, stopped circumcising their sons so they could compete in these games because, they would wrestle nude and stuff like that, perform nude, and they would do the discus game, which I have no idea what that is. I like ultimate frisbee myself, but I'm feeling it's different. Some went even further to surgically attach pigskin to create a foreskin. So, when Paul's talking about, don't try to hide the marks of your circumcision, I think it's in 1 Corinthians 7 or something like that. And there's other references to that. This might have been an actual thing. It might have been referencing an actual thing because this one had been going on. Even though the Greeks and ultimately lose to Rome, they win because Greek culture, Hellenization, continues. In Judea right now, everybody speaks Greek, right? It's the common language. So the ugly Menelaus, he was actually sent by Jason to go talk to Antiochus. I forget the reason, but Antiochus is on his way down, bringing us back to our timeline. He's on his way to attack the Ptolemies again in 168. And Menelaus is like, well, I'm just going to buy the priesthood myself, buy the high priest position myself. So he just gives more money because Jason had sent him with money, I believe. And he's just like, I'm just going to add some more money on top of that. And he's like, well, and he just liked Menelaus because he's even more Greek. But at this point, Antiochus is busy. He's thinking about taking the Ptolemies down, right? Until he got rejected by that line in the sand. So he's got to figure out how to pay his soldiers. And he's just angry altogether. So a rumor of Antiochus' death, after Menelaus took over, Jason was, had to flee. So Jason comes back to retake Jerusalem. So he's fighting his own men. There's no Seleucid garrison at this point. He's killing Jews. He fails to kill Menelaus or secure the government. And when Antiochus is coming back, he's just forced to flee to the wilderness. And eventually he dies in Egypt. So this revolt, this caused the king to think Judea was in revolt. It really wasn't. It was just one guy and just 1,000 soldiers. So Antiochus was furious. His high priest had been replaced. So he plundered the treasury. Probably just used it as an excuse. Probably knew it was up, just threw it out of proportion because he knew he had it. But he really goes overboard. He defiles the temple with sacrificing a pig. This is considered the abomination of desolation on the altar. Placing idols, Greek gods there. He issued an edict that forbid Torah observance such as circumcision. And many priests were forced to eat pork, and many just spit it out and just were tortured and killed in terrible, terrible ways. So go read about that in the Maccabees and Josephus. Second Maccabees is a story of, it's terrible. I don't know why I was caught in the car. I was listening to the audio. I'm like, no, stop. It's so bad. 7 brothers and their mother just one by one tortured and killed, trying to get them to just, go against Yahweh, just to break his covenant. Simple things like eating a piece of bacon. So stuff your standard Christian today would be like, all right, that's no problem. I'll take the bacon over having my limbs chopped off and being fried in oil. Definitely. That sounds okay. And they were rewarded. Those who did that and became Hellenized were rewarded by Antiochus and his officials. Yes, this is a picture of 70 AD under Rome. So this is a lot of Herodian structure here. I wouldn't have looked at this grand, but this does give us a picture of the Acra, kind of off to the right here, which would be similar to what the Greeks are going to build here in a second. And just to backtrack a little bit, doing a lot of that back and forth today. So back when Onias III, so the question is, with this abomination of desolation, it was like, where is God? Why isn't he defending his people? Why is he defending the temple? We just go back a little bit. And this is a picture. These 3 characters here, the guy on a horse, are all depicted in Maccabees. They're beating down this Heliodorus. I think this is around 170. he goes into the temple and he goes to pillage it. And the other priests are like, don't do that. And Onias the third is like, don't do that. And like these angelic figures come out and they beat him pretty much to death. And Onias the third, prays over him, and he does a sacrifice, and Heliodorus recovers, and he's so thankful, and he, goes back to Antiochus and tells him what happened. So the question is, Antiochus did the same thing. He plundered the temple, went in there, desecrated, far worse than Heliodorus did. Where was the response? And I would say it's just a picture of righteousness versus sin. There was a high priest, and there was people, living righteously, and that allows God to be there in his presence. But he punishes believers because he loves us, and he wants, so because they were living in sin, because they were turning back on his Torah. This is why Antiochus was brought in. This all played out for a reason. So that's the contrast between those two. That's what I would put forward there. Again, here's our picture of the Acra. This would be a more Herodian square block style. But we can see the Acra there. It would be close to the Temple Mount. So this happens over and over again in the story. The Jerusalem walls are dismantled. So there's just this little fortress here that comes into play later. That's why we mentioned it. The Acra. It's a cool name. So after Antiochus IV goes and, deals, fighting the Parthians again for the third time. And we'll get that again later when we talk about John Hyrcanus. We send this Apollonius guy down, and he pretends to be nice for a little bit, and then on the seventh day, on the Sabbath, he gets his soldiers out, full armor, and pretends like he's doing a parade with banners and everything, and people come out curious and just start slaughtering them. And this is when people just flee Jerusalem altogether, and the Maccabees flee. Jerusalem's just essentially abandoned except for the Greeks. And he kind of used the Sabbath day because he flushed out anyone who was observing that. The Greeks wouldn't have bothered. The Hellenized Jews, which, it's really an oxymoron to be a Hellenized Jew. If you're Jewish, you embrace Judaism or being a Hebrew, just like a Christian. If I say I'm a Christian, I believe in God. It's not just because my parents are Christian. So we use that term just so you know that they were once of the Jewish faith. And Samaria, you think about Antiochus IV, he's going up from Jerusalem, he's going back north, he's going to go through Samaria, so he's going to, what about the lost 10 tribes? A lot of them returned. What's happening in there? It's something that we see in Jesus' day. In Mount Gerizim, that temple is mentioned as well, and he's talking to them at the well. They just were like, we're Arabs, we're Nabateans. Don't hurt us. So they just renamed their temple right there. It's like, it's this temple? The temple of Jupiter Hellenus. Yeah. No, it's not a temple to Yahweh. And then it always was. It's like, were they misguided? Yes, but they always had like Hebraic roots at least, and the understanding of Abraham and maybe the book of Genesis. And the Samaritan faith still exists today. Trying to drive through this as fast as we can. So Mattathias, the Hasmonean descendant, supposedly, of Phinehas. So our buddy Phinehas, you can remember, was the Levite who killed I believe it was, of the tribe of Judah, who, they're taking pagan wives, doing what they shouldn't, and he, takes that spear and drives it right through them. So this is a contrast to what Mattathias does. There's this official that tells Mattathias to sacrifice this pig on this altar outside of Jerusalem. And it probably wasn't even an altar. It's just, they set up an altar and like, here, sacrifice a pig. And, he was a Levite. He said, no, I'm not going to do it. So this other Jew says he's going to step up and do it. And Mattathias kills him. And then Mattathias' sons, Judah Maccabee included, kill that small force of Greeks and go into the wilderness and start, essentially doing, Braveheart, William Wallace style guerrilla warfare, slowly building forces. So Mattathias quickly dies off. We don't tell how he dies, but slowly the five brothers. We got John, we got Simon, we got Judas, we got Eleazar, and we got Jonathan. So these five guys are all captains. They build a force of good 6,000 soldiers, doing guerrilla style warfare. taking down small forts and towns, freeing slaves. A lot of Jews were set into slavery when Antiochus came into Jerusalem, just to pay off his troops. Lots of Jews were killed and lots of Jews were sent into slavery, and then many were tortured and murdered. It was a terrible, terrible time. Rough time. But, if you want to read all about that, there you go. Maccabees and Josephus will give you all the works of Judah. Cool stuff. A lot of stuff on YouTube, too. You can watch little battles that took place. People really break it down. I'm just trying to give you this perspective here on the Pharisees and the Sadducees and where they came from. So we're going to skip a lot of that. So they retake Jerusalem in 167, which was probably not that hard since it didn't have any walls, remember, but there is the Acra, which is filled with Greeks and, these Hellenized Jews. So they go and they rebuild the walls, Judah does, and they rededicate the temple, and that brings us to our story of Hanukkah, which we will get to next week. So there's Mr. Judah Maccabee, the hammer, who sadly probably didn't use a hammer, but that's how I always picture him, like a giant hammer. And so yeah, we'll talk about, is there really a miracle, the oil, and what, there's two big miracles that happen. So we'll look at those next week. So we'll get out of here, back out. I'll see if anyone has said hello to me. Yo, we got